Imagine for a second that you are sitting in your living room. You are curled up on the sofa, maybe sipping a glass of wine. The fire is crackling in the fireplace.
Right. Sounds like a pretty standard cozy evening.
Yeah, exactly. And sitting right next to you is your long-term boyfriend. He is a law student. He is heavily involved in state politics. He is handsome. I mean, he is basically the picture of respectable, upwardly mobile stability.
Okay, setting the scene.
But as you watch the flames together, what you do not know, what you cannot possibly fathom, is that underneath those burning logs is the severed head of a 19-year-old college student.
Oh my God. I mean, it sounds like a scene from a highly stylized, almost absurdly gruesome horror film. Just that juxtaposition of, domestic tranquility and absolute unimaginable savagery.
Totally. But this isn't a movie. This was a Tuesday night in Washington State in 1974. And the man staring into that fire was Theodore Robert Bundy.
Wow.
Today, we are taking you into a landscape where the predator did not lurk in the shadows. He didn't hide on the fringes of society waiting for the cover of darkness. He hid in plain sight. I mean, he hid in law school classrooms, in government offices, in the very institutions of law and order.
Yeah, the term mask of sanity gets thrown around a lot in popular culture, usually just to describe someone who's a bit two-faced.
Right, like a bad boss or something.
Exactly. But what we are looking at today is the absolute clinical apex of that concept. We are going to examine the terrifying speed at which that mask allowed a predator to operate and, escalate his violence across multiple jurisdictions.
Completely undetected.
Completely. By a system that was fundamentally unequipped to see him.
And that is the exact mission for this deep dive. We are deconstructing the chronological evolution of this perpetrator's 1974 Pacific Northwest attacks. We are going to meticulously trace his path from January through May of that year, but we aren't just reciting a timeline, right?
No, we need to analyze the actual mechanics of his escalation. We really want to understand how he rapidly refined his methodology from localized, chaotic, blunt force assaults to highly sophisticated, interstate lethal abductions.
Yeah. And to do this, what's our main source material today?
We are relying on a very specific clinical source text called Pathological Predation, a forensic reconstruction of Ted Bundy's 1974 Pacific Northwest spree.
Okay.
And we are keeping our analytical focus strictly on the progression of 5 specific victims during this incredibly condensed 5-month time frame. So that's Karen Sparks, Linda Ann Healy, Donna Gail Manson, Susan Elaine Rancourt, and Roberta Kathleen Parks.
Before we step one foot further into this timeline, I need to be completely transparent with you, the listener. We are not censoring the realities of these crimes today.
No, we really can't.
We can't. The crime scene reports, the forensic evidence, the psychological profiling we're about to unpack, they contain graphic, deeply disturbing details of extreme violence, blunt force trauma, and sexual sadism.
It is heavy stuff.
Very heavy. We are exploring the structural mechanics of a serial predator's escalation. And doing that honestly means looking directly at the sheer brutality of what he did to these young women. So if you are sensitive to graphic descriptions of assault, mutilation, and murder, please, this is the time to step away.
Yeah, it is a necessary element of forensic truth. You really cannot understand the evolution of this specific pathology or, the profound failures of the 1970s investigative apparatus without understanding the physical reality of the crime scenes themselves.
Right.
The violence wasn't incidental to his crimes. It was the entire point.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we even get to that first physical attack in January 1974, we have to talk about the camouflage. We have to understand the architecture of the mask this man wore.
Yeah, because you don't just wake up one morning and decide to become an apex predator. There is a gestation period.
Let's look at his origins. He was born Theodore Robert Cowell in 1946, and right out of the gate, there is a profound structural rupture in his psychological development.
Yeah, the foundational reality of his childhood was basically a massive familial deception. Because he was born out of wedlock in the mid-1940s.
Which carried an intense social stigma back then.
Huge stigma.
Yeah.
So his family constructed an elaborate lie. He was raised to believe that his grandparents were his actual parents and that his biological mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was his older sister.
That is just wild.
Right. And he didn't discover his illegitimacy, the actual truth of his parentage, until his teenage years.
I am always struck by how devastating that specific kind of revelation must be to a developing brain. Finding out that your entire life is essentially a stage play.
Completely.
The people you trust most in the world, the people who are supposed to anchor your understanding of reality, have been lying to you every single day since you were born. The forensic reconstruction points to this as a major catalyst.
Oh, absolutely.
It didn't just foster resentment toward his mother, it taught him a very dark lesson about reality itself.
Let's take that a step further into the neurology of child development. Psychologists point to this kind of profound rupture as the exact moment a permanent fracture occurs in a person's ability to form genuine, empathetic attachments.
Because the trust is just gone.
Gone. If your core family unit is built on a complex, sustained deception, you learn early on that truth is entirely malleable. You learn that people can be manipulated, that reality is basically whatever you can successfully convince people it is.
He realized the adults around him were wearing masks.
Exactly. So he learned to build his own.
And he didn't just build a mask, he built a fortress. By the early 1970s, he had cultivated a persona that was indistinguishable from a rising star in the Pacific Northwest's professional class.
Yeah, a total golden boy.
In 1972, he graduates from the University of Washington with a degree in psychology. He literally spent years studying the human mind in an academic setting. I have to push back on the timeline here a bit, though. Do you think he pursued that psychology degree as a deliberate manual for his later crimes? Like a way to learn the blueprint of the vault? Or did the academic knowledge just sort of accidentally throw gasoline on the fire of what he called his entity?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it is tempting to view it as a master plan from day one. But the behavioral profiling suggests it was a bit more insidious than that.
How so?
I wouldn't say he enrolled in Psych 101 with a murder plot in mind, but you're looking at a textbook evolution of high-functioning psychopathy. A psychopath fundamentally lacks intrinsic empathy, so they have to learn human emotion mechanically.
You have to fake it.
Right, they have to study how people react to fear, how they display trust, how they signal vulnerability. His psychology degree gave him the academic vocabulary and the theoretical frameworks to understand the very things he lacked naturally.
So he was literally studying us.
Precisely. He learned operant conditioning. He learned behavioral triggers. He learned what makes people comply with authority. And he weaponized that education. It refined his predatory radar. He wasn't just observing people. He was cataloging their behavioral blind spots.
Man, and the camouflage gets even thicker when you look at his societal positioning in late 1973, right before the spree erupts. He legally changes his name to Bundy. He enrolls as a law student at the University of Puget Sound.
A law student.
Yeah, and this next detail always stops me cold. He is working for the Emergency Services Department in Olympia, the state capital.
Right.
He is literally part of the government apparatus designed to respond to crises. On top of that, he is an active participant in the Washington State Republican Party campaign. He's attending fundraisers, shaking hands with politicians.
We are noting those specific affiliations,
Mhm.
the law school, the political campaigns, the government job, purely to highlight the architecture of his unthreatening persona.
Because it's so opposite of what you'd expect.
Totally. In the cultural context of 1973 America, those are the ultimate building blocks of social respectability. He wasn't some fringe outsider peering in through the window looking suspicious. He was inside the building. He was helping to run the building.
Society at that time, maybe even today, strongly equated social standing with innocence. We assume that a monster looks like Charles Manson. Wild-eyed, unkempt, ranting.
Yeah, we want the monster to look like a monster.
We really do. We do not assume the monster is the well-spoken law student in a tailored blazer driving a light-colored 1968 Volkswagen Beetle.
And the VW Beetle is a crucial piece of this camouflage. In the early 70s, the Beetle was the counterculture car. It was a hippie car. It was almost comical.
Like Herbie the Love Bug.
Exactly. It projected approachability, harmlessness, economic modesty. It was the anti-predator vehicle. It rendered him visually invisible in a university town.
And to top off this illusion of normalcy, he had a deeply entrenched domestic life. Since 1969, he had been dating a single mother named Elizabeth Klepfer. To the outside world, to her, he is a reliable partner.
He's playing stepdad.
Yeah, he's a surrogate father to her young daughter. He cooks dinner, they go on trips. But beneath that meticulously curated surface, the forensic reconstruction shows he was simmering. He was already engaging in escalating precursor behaviors.
Yeah, the entity, which was his own internal term for his homicidal compulsion, didn't just wake up one day fully formed and demand blood. There is always a ramp-up period in organized serial predation.
What were his early precursors?
The files detail his early forays into voyeurism, peeping into the windows of female university students. Voyeurism is a classic precursor because it involves non-consensual observation. It is the crossing of a boundary to take something visual without permission.
Just watching, but taking power.
Exactly. And from there, it escalated into petty theft, showing a blatant disregard for societal rules and the property of others.
And fueling all of this, keeping the engine running in the background, was an intense, escalating addiction to hardcore pornography, specifically material featuring extreme violence and subjugation. The fantasies were metastasizing.
The visual stimulation was no longer enough. The voyeurism wasn't enough.
The pressure inside this compartmentalized brain was building to a breaking point. Which brings us to the terrifying moment when the fantasy demanded tactile, physical reality. January 4, 1974, the savage initiation.
This is the critical transition point where the theoretical becomes horrifyingly practical. And it is vital to understand that this 1974 Pacific Northwest spree did not begin with a quiet, mysterious disappearance. It began with an act of explosive, extreme violence that was essentially an interrupted homicide.
Let's look at the target. Her name is Karen Sparks. Early police reports and some older media identified her under the pseudonym Joni Lenz, but her name is Karen Sparks. She is an 18-year-old student at the University of Washington. She's a talented dancer. She lives in a basement apartment in a shared rooming house on the 5000 block of 12th Avenue Northeast. This is right in the heart of the dense, bustling University District of Seattle.
The environmental context of her living situation is deeply significant to his methodology. A basement apartment in the 1970s often meant ground-level windows that were easily accessible from the street or an alleyway.
Right.
It offered a specific vulnerability. On the night of January 4, he targets her residence. The forensic analysis of the scene indicates he gained entry through an unlocked door or window.
This connects directly back to his precursor behaviors. He had been peeping into windows in this exact neighborhood. He knows how to move through these alleyways. He knows how to test latches without making a sound.
The stealthy entry strongly suggests he had engaged in prior surveillance. This wasn't a crime of sudden, random opportunity where he was just walking by. He had likely watched the property.
He studied them.
He did. He learned the routines of the housemates. He knew exactly which window or basement door was habitually left unlatched. He moves through the darkness of this shared apartment with a terrifying level of confidence, bypassing other rooms to locate Sparks asleep in her bed.
And this is where the brutality of the initiation is just staggering. We talked about his meticulous camouflage, his tailored suits, his law books, but when he finally strikes, he doesn't bring some sophisticated, pre-planned murder kit with him.
No, not yet.
He improvises in the most savage way possible. He removes a metal rod, a heavy piece of steel approximately 30 inches long, directly from the frame of her own bed. I want to pause on the brutal intimacy of that act. He literally dismantled the architecture of her safe space to weaponize it against her.
Yeah.
Why do that? Was this raw, chaotic impulse because he forgot a weapon, or was this a calculated statement of total dominance?
It is a terrifying blend of both, but profiling leans heavily into the assertion of dominance.
Yeah.
Using an object sourced from the victim's immediate, intimate environment demonstrates an extreme level of arrogance.
Oh, for sure.
He's standing in her bedroom, watching her sleep, and taking the physical time and making the mechanical effort to remove a piece of her bed to use as a bludgeon. It is an absolute assertion of power over her reality. And the attack itself, as detailed in the medical and forensic reports, is a brutal two-stage process. It's immediate incapacitation followed by profound sadistic degradation.
First, he uses that 30-inch metal rod to bludgeon her head as she sleeps. The physical force he generates is massive. He shatters her skull, causing an immediate, catastrophic neurological collapse.
Yeah.
I think pop culture has conditioned us to view serial predators as stealthy, silent killers who slip a garrote around a neck. This was not that. This was explosive, blunt force trauma meant to eliminate the brain's ability to resist in a microsecond.
It is raw, chaotic, and incredibly messy. The physics of blunt force trauma to the skull generate massive amounts of blood spatter and noise.
Right.
This method is totally unlike his later, more refined methodologies, where he relied heavily on controlled strangulation. Here, in his first known physical strike, he is physically battering her with tremendous unbridled force. And once she is rendered completely unconscious and defenseless, the second stage of the pathology takes over.
The sexual assault. And again, a warning about the graphic nature of this. He does not stop at the bludgeoning. He uses that same bloodied metal rod as a tool for violent penetration.
God.
The internal injuries she suffered were catastrophic. The medical reports from the hospital later specified a completely ruptured bladder and severe tearing injuries to her vaginal and rectal tracts.
The sheer brutality and the specific nature of this secondary act tell forensic behavioral profilers a great deal about the entity driving him. This definitively indicates a sexual sadist who derives his psychological and physical gratification not just from the act of sexual release, but from the total, absolute physical destruction of the victim.
It's pure annihilation.
Yes. He isn't seeking a partner, he is treating her body as an object to be obliterated and defiled. The violence is the sex.
And after inflicting this catastrophic damage, he simply leaves. He slips back out into the Seattle night. And Karen Sparks remains lying in that blood-soaked bed for nearly 20 hours.
20 hours.
It isn't until the next evening that her roommates, realizing they haven't seen her all day, finally go into her room and discover the horror.
That 20-hour delay in discovery was devastating to her medical outcome. When paramedics finally arrived on the scene, she was in a profound coma. The brain swelling was immense. She did not wake up for 10 days.
The fact that she survived at all is nothing short of a medical miracle. But the forensic evidence of the injuries he inflicted shows that his signature was permanent.
Oh, yeah.
When she finally emerged from the coma, she suffered permanent brain damage. She lost 50% of her hearing, 40% of her vision. She developed chronic, maddening tinnitus. And she suffered severe, ongoing epileptic fits for the rest of her life as a direct neurological result of the massive cranial trauma.
Her survival was statistically incredibly unlikely given the sheer force of the attack. Sparks herself, in later years, theorized about why he stopped.
Why does she think he stopped?
She noted that one of her roommates had a known habit of talking very loudly in his sleep. Her theory was that the roommate made a sudden noise in the quiet house, which spooked the attacker, breaking his concentration and forcing him to flee the scene before he could ensure she was actually dead.
A completely random stroke of luck. A roommate murmuring in their sleep is the only reason she lived.
Yeah.
But from a behavioral standpoint, this failure to secure a kill forces a radical, rapid shift in his methodology. Leaving a victim behind, even a comatose one, meant leaving a physical witness.
Right.
It meant leaving a crime scene right there in the bedroom that investigators could immediately tape off and analyze for hair, fibers, and fingerprints. The entity needed total control, and he quickly realized that a localized attack in a shared house with thin walls and sleeping roommates was far too chaotic. He didn't have control of the environment.
That is the crucial takeaway from the Sparks attack for him. It was a dark learning experience. He realized that the victim's environment is inherently unpredictable. Roommates talk in their sleep, a landlord might drop by, a dog might bark.
So many variables.
Too many variables. To satiate his pathological needs without the constant terror of interruption, he had to change the fundamental geographic dynamic of the crime.
So he knew he could overpower a sleeping victim, but to get the uninterrupted time the entity craved, he couldn't leave them in their own beds. Which leads us to the terrifying adaptation less than a month later. February 1st, 1974. He returns to the exact same hunting ground, the University District in Seattle. The target this time is 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy.
Linda Ann Healy represents a slight shift in victimology, but firmly within his emerging archetype. She is a senior at the University of Washington and honors student in psychology.
Okay.
She was also quite well known locally because she broadcasted early morning ski reports on a local radio station. She was vibrant, visible, and deeply embedded in the campus community.
On the evening of January 31st, she had been socializing with friends at Dante's Tavern. This was a very popular local watering hole right near her rooming house, which was located on the 5500 block of Northeast 12th Street.
And we know from later investigations that he was a frequent, almost obsessive patron of bars in the University District. He used them as observation decks.
Creepy.
Yeah, the forensic probability is that he either spotted her at Dante's that night and physically tracked her walk home, or he had been stalking her rooming house for days prior.
She returns home around midnight. She chats with her roommates, goes down to her basement bedroom, and goes to sleep. The architecture is nearly identical to the Sparks attack of vulnerable basement room in a shared house.
Exactly.
But the next morning, Linda doesn't show up for her 6 a.m. radio broadcast. Her coworkers call the house. The roommates go down to the basement to check on her. Here's where it gets really interesting. The scene diverges from the sheer chaos of the Sparks attack in a way that is profoundly chilling. They walk into her room, and it is perfectly orderly.
Yeah.
The bed is made, and not just thrown together, it is made with a meticulous, uncharacteristic neatness.
It is a detail that feels completely incongruous with a violent home invasion abduction. When investigators reconstruct this, they are looking at a scene that actively defies expectations. That compulsive need for order amidst extreme violence is a massive flashing light for behavioral profilers.
The roommates only realize something is horribly wrong when they physically pull back those neatly tucked covers. That is when they find the bloodstains soaked into the pillow and the head of the mattress. And as they look closer, there is this bizarre, terrifying ritualism left behind. They find a single bloodstain on Linda's nightgown.
Just one.
But the nightgown isn't crumpled on the bed or tossed on the floor. It is hung neatly on a hanger in her closet. Linda is gone, and so are the street clothes, the jeans and blouse she had been wearing the night before at the tavern.
Let's break down the forensic reconstruction of those moments. He enters through an unlocked basement door, utilizing the same stealthy methodology as the Sparks attack. He approaches the bed. He bludgeons her unconscious, likely with a similar blunt instrument, hence the blood on the pillow. But instead of continuing the sexual assault right there on the mattress, his methodology shifts. He stops. He takes the time, in the dark, with roommates sleeping upstairs, to strip her unconscious body. He removes her bloodied nightgown, puts it on a hanger, hangs it in the closet, and then painstakingly dresses her limp, bleeding body in her street clothes before carrying her out into the cold night.
I have to ask about the psychology of that specific sequence. Making the bed and hanging up the bloody nightgown, was that a coldly practical move to delay her roommates from calling the police? Or was it a deep-seated psychological compulsion for order? Because dressing a dead weight in jeans is incredibly difficult.
Oh, extremely.
It feels so methodical, so terrifyingly calm.
It operates simultaneously on both levels, which is what makes his pathology so sophisticated and sinister. Practically, yes, a neatly made bed buys him invaluable time. If a roommate just peeks their head in the door at 7 a.m., they see a tidy room and assume Linda left early for the radio station.
Which delays everything.
It delays the panic and the 911 call by hours. But psychologically, it is an absolute manifestation of his need to control the environment. He is literally tidying up the scene of his own violence. He's restoring order to chaos. And dressing her in street clothes. That is the definitive evolutionary shift from the Sparks attack. This is the birth of the secondary kill site.
He realized he couldn't stay in the house. The house belonged to her. He needed a place that belonged to him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Abducting Linda Ann Healy allowed him to transport her out of her unpredictable environment and into an environment where he had absolute unquestioned control.
Yeah.
A place where he could engage in extended, hours-long sessions of assault, murder, and, as we will discuss, necrophilia, without the slightest fear of a roommate waking up or a siren interrupting him.
And we know exactly where that secondary kill site was, although it took an agonizingly long time to find it. Fast forward over a year later to March 1975. A group of forestry students from Green River Community College are out doing field work in the dense, overgrown woods of Taylor Mountain. This is a remote, heavily forested area about 30 miles southeast of Seattle. They stumble upon what the forensic anthropologists could only describe as a boneyard.
It was a horrific scene of scattered remains, severely degraded by weather and animal activity. But among the remains they meticulously recovered was the skull of Linda Ann Healy.
Wow.
And when the medical examiners analyzed it, the forensic pathology perfectly mirrored the attack on Karen Sparks. The skull exhibited massive, catastrophic, blunt force trauma to the temporal region.
He used the exact same explosive force to subdue her. But the discovery of Taylor Mountain itself is monumental from an investigative and profiling standpoint. It wasn't just a convenient ditch where he dumped a body in a panic.
Not at all.
The tight clustering of remains proved that he had established a sacred disposal site. He'd created a private hunting ground and a graveyard, a geographic anchor for his pathology that he felt completely safe returning to over and over again.
That's a huge escalation.
It is. Having perfected this lethal abduction model, striking quietly, securing the victim, and transporting them to his sacred space, his confidence grows. He realizes the system can't track him. So he starts to expand his geographical footprint beyond Seattle. And this is also where a chillingly specific physical archetype starts to emerge in his victimology. We are moving to March 12th, 1974. The vanishing at Evergreen.
The victim is Donna Gail Manson. She is a 19-year-old freshman at Evergreen State College, located down in Olympia, Washington. This is roughly 60 miles south of his hunting grounds in Seattle, but crucially, Olympia is where he was actively working his government job at the Emergency Services Department.
Let's focus on the physical archetype for a moment because the visual pattern is undeniable here. Donna Gail Manson is petite, about 5 foot tall. She has long, straight brown hair parted right down the middle, which was a very popular style at the
I
time.
was everywhere.
Yeah, but it perfectly matches the aesthetic of Linda Ann Healy, and crucially, it matches the aesthetic of a woman who had deeply rejected him years prior. On the evening of March 12th, Donna leaves her campus apartment around 7 p.m. to walk to a jazz concert on campus. She's wearing a fuzzy dark maxi coat, colorful pants, and an agate ring. She is the exact striking image of the women the entity is obsessively targeting.
What is particularly fascinating about the Manson abduction is how the specific cultural environment of the campus played directly into his hands. Evergreen State College in the early 1970s was famously unconventional.
Right.
It was a very liberal, free spirit institution carved out of dense, dripping Pacific Northwest woods.
Yeah.
The culture there heavily normalized transient behavior. Students hitchhiked everywhere. They took spontaneous, unannounced road trips to California.
Just living off the grid a bit.
Exactly. It was not considered highly unusual for a student to simply disappear from their dorm for a few days to, find themselves.
Which meant that when Donna didn't come home that night, or the next night, her roommates didn't immediately panic. They assumed she was just crashing with friends or took a trip. She wasn't officially reported missing to the police for nearly a week.
In the realm of missing persons investigations,
Hmm.
a one-week delay is an absolute eternity.
Hmm.
It is a catastrophic loss of investigative momentum.
Hmm.
It gave him an unbelievable, insurmountable head start to completely process the crime, dispose of the body, and eliminate any physical evidence linking him to Olympia.
And the details of that disposal, I have to warn you, this is one of the most disturbing elements of his entire psychological profile. The Manson case actually remained a total mystery for over a decade. Her body was never found at Taylor Mountain or anywhere else.
We only know what happened because he finally confessed to it on death row in 1989.
Right, just days before his execution. He admitted that he abducted her from the campus, likely using a ruse to get her into his Beetle. He murdered her at an undisclosed remote location. But the detail about what he did with her remains defies all neurotypical comprehension. He confessed to decapitating her. And then he took her severed head, brought it back to his girlfriend Elizabeth Klopfer's house, and burned her skull in the living room fireplace while Elizabeth was away.
The sheer audacity, the staggering risk of that act is the ultimate clinical expression of his compartmentalization. What's fascinating here is how absolute that separation is.
I really want to dig into that word, compartmentalization, because it's the ultimate grotesque double life. He is literally playing house with his long-term girlfriend. He's embodying this respectable, politically connected law student persona.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, he is cremating the severed head of a teenager in their domestic sanctuary. How does a human brain compartmentalize to that extreme? How do you sit on a sofa reading a textbook or watching television, feeling the warmth of the fire, knowing exactly what biological material is creating that heat?
It requires a neurological and psychological detachment that is almost impossible for you or I to truly grasp. In a highly psychopathic brain, compartmentalization isn't just keeping a secret, it is the construction of impenetrable mental bulkheads.
Yeah. Mental bulkheads, I like that term.
Right. For him, the respectable law student persona and the murderous entity were separated by a solid concrete wall. They did not share emotional bandwidth. The skull wasn't a human being to him anymore, it was a trophy. Burning it in his domestic sanctuary, the very place he played the role of the good boyfriend, was an act of supreme, godlike arrogance.
Whoa.
He was proving to himself that he was smarter than everyone. He could bring his ultimate darkness right into the glowing heart of his normal life, and no one, not the police, not his girlfriend, would ever see it. Because of this method of absolute destruction, Donna Gale Manson's remains were never recovered.
With victims like Healy and Manson seemingly vanishing into thin air and no bodies immediately being found to spark a massive public panic, his confidence skyrockets to a terrifying new level. The night hunting isn't enough anymore. He grows bolder.
Much bolder.
He wants to prove he can hunt in broad daylight, in highly populated public spaces. And he figures out how to do it not by using stealth or overwhelming force, but by manipulating fundamental human decency. April 17th, 1974. We are moving east across the state to Central Washington State College in the town of Ellensburg.
This marks a critical, highly sophisticated escalation in his methodology. Up until now, he has relied on stealth, darkness, or the isolated culture of a wooded campus. At Ellensburg, he changes the game completely. The target is 18-year-old Susan Elaine Rancor, a biology student who had recently moved from Alaska.
Susan is walking back to her dorm room around 8 p.m. It's evening, but there are still plenty of people around. She's just coming from a meeting. And this is where investigators later gathered the first confirmed detailed witness reports of his performance. This is the debut of the infamous injured man ruse.
Multiple witnesses on campus that week described seeing a handsome, well-dressed, very articulate man struggling. He had his arm in a sling, or sometimes he wore a fake cast on his leg and used crutches. He would purposefully drop a large stack of books or fumble awkwardly with a heavy briefcase.
Creating a scene.
Right. And then he would directly approach young female students, specifically those who matched his archetype, and politely ask for their help.
I think about how terrifying the specific tactic is because he didn't use a knife or a gun to get her to his car. He used her own empathy. He essentially hacked the societal software we are all running.
That's a great way to put it.
Think about it. We are raised from childhood, biologically and culturally, to help members of our in-group who are in distress. If you see someone with a broken arm drop their books, your brain doesn't signal threat. It signals assistance required. It's ingrained in our social contract.
He weaponized that exact social conditioning. By presenting himself as physically injured and vulnerable, he completely bypassed the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for threat detection. When a young woman looked at him, her brain didn't register a predator, it registered a victim who needed a favor. He used their kindness as a snare.
He asks Susan for help carrying his books to his car, and there it is again. He leads her toward the ubiquitous light-colored VW Beetle parked on the edge of campus, a totally unthreatening, almost comical little car. He leads her to a slightly more secluded area of the parking lot, and the very second they are isolated near the vehicle, the mask drops and the trap snaps shut. He overpowers her. Susan Raincourt vanishes from the Ellensburg campus that night without a single scream being heard.
The brutal efficiency of the ruse allowed him to operate in highly visible populated areas without drawing any suspicion. But the aftermath of the Rancourt abduction reveals just how terrifyingly dedicated he was to his established geographical rituals. Years later, Rancourt's skull was conclusively identified through forensic dental records among the scattered remains found at Taylor Mountain.
Let's look at a map for a second to understand the sheer logistics of that. Ellensburg is located in eastern Washington. It is separated from the Seattle area by the massive Cascade Mountain Range. Taylor Mountain is on the western side of those mountains.
It's a huge drive.
Right. That means after subduing Susan, he secured her in his vehicle, whether she was deceased or bound and unconscious, and drove for nearly 2 hours, navigating mountain passes and major state highways to bring her back to his private disposal ground.
It demonstrates a level of supreme, almost delusional confidence in his own invisibility. He is traversing major interstates with a victim in his vehicle, completely unconcerned about the thousands of variables that could expose him.
Yeah, a flat tire, anything.
He isn't worried about a state trooper pulling him over for a busted taillight. He is totally committed to bringing his victims back to his sacred space, no matter the geographical distance.
Which brings us to the geographical and pathological peak of this specific spring spree. We are at May 6, 1974. The heat is starting to turn up slightly in Washington. Police are slowly starting to realize young women are vanishing. So to alleviate the pressure, he decides to cross state lines entirely. He travels over 250 miles south to Corvallis, Oregon.
He is expanding his hunting grounds to avoid local task forces, but his methodology and his victimology remain rigidly consistent. The victim in Corvallis is 22-year-old Roberta Kathleen Parks. She's a student at Oregon State University.
Roberta was last seen leaving her dorm, Sackett Hall, late in the evening to meet friends for coffee at the student union. And the forensic behavioral profile highlights a deeply devastating detail about her state of mind that night. She was in a highly fragile emotional state. She had recently gone through a painful breakup, and she was carrying the heavy psychological burden of her father being seriously ill back home. She was distressed.
Criminologists refer to this as the refinement of his predatory radar. He didn't just look for women with hair parted down the middle. He had developed an uncanny ability to spot individuals who were internally preoccupied, emotionally vulnerable, or distracted.
They were just easier targets.
Exactly. If a person is carrying a heavy emotional burden, their situational awareness drops. They are less attuned to their immediate physical surroundings. They are far more susceptible to a charming smile, or more likely to just go along with a polite, persistent request for help from an injured man just to get the interaction over with.
For years, there were wild rumors on the OSU campus that the killer used the university's underground steam tunnels to grab her, pulling her into the darkness. But the forensics and his own later confessions point to a much simpler, much more terrifying reality. He almost certainly used the exact same injured man ruse near a campus parking area. She helped him, and she vanished. But the aftermath of the Corvallis abduction is what truly forces us to confront the darkest depths of his pathology. When they finally found her remains, they were at Taylor Mountain.
Yes. In March 1975, the King County Medical Examiner identified her skull completely by surprise, alongside the remains of Healy and Rancourt in the Washington woods.
So, what does this all mean? I am struggling to understand the logic of this, and I want you to explain it to me. Driving from Corvallis, Oregon, all the way north to Taylor Mountain outside Seattle is a journey of approximately 250 miles.
A long, long way.
Driving 250 miles with a murdered college student in your car defies all logic of self-preservation. Think of all the things that go wrong on a multi-hour interstate drive. A flat tire, a speeding ticket, running out of gas, a minor fender bender with another driver. Any of those things results in a police officer looking into his car. Why not just leave her in Oregon? He was surrounded by vast, dense, impenetrable wilderness in every direction. Why take this massive, massive logistical risk? Why did they all have to end up on Taylor Mountain?
You are looking at it through the lens of a rational criminal trying not to get caught. But that question goes directly to the absolute core of his pathology. This raises an important question about how his brain was actually functioning. The logistics, the risk of a flat tire, they didn't matter because the psychological compulsion completely overrode all rational risk assessment.
Okay.
By bringing Roberta Parks 250 miles back to Taylor Mountain, he wasn't just hiding a body. He was integrating her into his collection.
His collection, he viewed them as possessions.
Exactly. For him, the physical act of murder was merely the precursor. It was just the messy means to a psychological end. The ultimate goal of the entity was total, unyielding, eternal possession. In his real life, women had autonomy. They could reject him, they could leave him. But Taylor Mountain was his domain.
Right.
Bringing her there allowed him to interact with multiple victims simultaneously. The psychological profiling confirms that he would return to the Taylor Mountain site days, sometimes weeks later, to engage in extensive necrophilia. He would groom the decomposing corpses. He would wash their hair, apply makeup to their faces, paint their nails.
Jesus.
It was a macabre, grotesque theater where he had absolute godlike control over his collection long after the spark of life was gone. He was reversing the power dynamic of every rejection he had ever felt.
It is sickening. It is the ultimate degradation of a human being. But from a purely mechanical standpoint, how did he physically do it? How do you move a human body 250 miles up Interstate 5 without anyone at a gas station or a toll booth noticing?
Let's talk about the mechanics of the mobile crime scene.
That 1968 VW Beetle was not just camouflage, it was an essential piece of his tactical methodology. He notoriously modified the interior. He completely removed the front passenger seat.
Which is such a bizarre modification. If anyone were to glance inside his car in a parking lot, a missing passenger seat is incredibly conspicuous. It is unusual, yes, but it served a terrifying practical purpose. The interior of Beetle is very small. You cannot easily hide a body on the back seat. But by removing the front passenger seat entirely, it created a flat, elongated space.
Oh, I see.
It allowed him to lay an unconscious or deceased victim completely flat on the floorboards, stretching from the dashboard to the back seat, well below the window line. He would cover them with a dark blanket or a coat. From the outside, a passing car or a toll booth operator would just see a young man driving alone in his quirky little car.
And the car wasn't just transport, it was a rolling storage unit for his customized murder kit. We know exactly what he carried because when he was finally pulled over by a patrolman in Utah much later, in the late summer of 1975, police searched that Beetle. They found a ski mask, an ice pick, handcuffs, a crowbar, and torn strips of sheets used as ligatures.
The inclusion of the crowbar in that kit is particularly significant when we look back at the 1974 forensics. When anthropologists analyzed the skulls recovered from Taylor Mountain, they noted massive blunt force trauma. But it was heavily concentrated on the side or the back of the cranium.
Catching them off guard.
Yes, this specific impact pattern indicated the victims were struck from behind by surprise or struck while already lying incapacitated. The heavy metal crowbar found in the trunk of his Beetle was almost certainly the instrument he used to inflict those catastrophic, silencing fractures.
He had everything he needed to subdue, transport, and murder, all neatly tucked away in a vehicle that society viewed as harmless. But the modifications to the car and the clever ruses only explain how he overpowered the victims. They do not explain how a man operating this brazenly across 2 states, leaving blood in basements, got away with it for 5 solid months.
No, for that you have to look higher up.
Exactly. To understand that, we have to look at the profound systemic failures of 1974. I want you, listening to this right now, to think about how much we rely on technology today to keep us safe. If a crime happens now, data is instantly shared across national networks. Cell phone towers ping locations, license plate readers flag cars crossing bridges, ring cameras capture everything.
It's a completely different world.
Back in 1974, simply driving across a county line was enough to completely erase your trail. It is a terrifying reminder of how vulnerable society was to information lag.
The information lag was his greatest ally. He didn't just outsmart the police, he operated in the massive, gaping blind spots of the system itself. In 1974, police departments operated in absolute, hermetically sealed silos. Seattle Police, Olympia Police, the Ellensburg Campus Police, the Corvallis investigators in Oregon, they did not talk to each other as a matter of routine.
There was no internet.
Right. There were no centralized computer databases. Everything was kept on paper files in metal cabinets. A missing college student in Oregon was just a local missing person flyer pinned to a local bulletin board. It was not digitally flagged or linked to a blood-stained basement room 250 miles away in Seattle.
And he exploited that lack of communication perfectly. He lived in Seattle, he attended law school down in Tacoma, he worked in Olympia, he physically moved between these jurisdictions daily, he knew the borders. And perhaps most importantly, his social class acted as an impenetrable proxy for innocence.
That is the crucial systemic cognitive bias that protected him. When police detectives are looking for a brutal, sadistic killer who bludgeons women in their beds, they are looking for someone who fits their preconceived, hard-boiled notion of a violent criminal. They are looking for an ex-convict, a drifter, someone who looks dangerous.
A stereotype.
Yes. A well-dressed, articulate law student who is actively working for the state government simply does not fit that profile. He was practically invisible to the investigators precisely because he was exactly the kind of person society trusted to run things.
It wasn't until the summer of 1974 when he became so arrogant that he abducted 2 young women in broad daylight from Lake Sammamish State Park right in front of thousands of sunbathers that the police finally connected the dots and a regional task force was formed. But by then, the horrific spree we just discussed was already complete. The damage was done.
And the only reason we even know the definitive tragic fate of Linda Ann Healy, Susan Rancourt, and Roberta Parks is because of the forensic breakthroughs that followed that gruesome discovery by the forestry students at Taylor Mountain.
Right. March 1975. The recovery effort out there in the woods was a logistical nightmare. Sifting through dense, wet Pacific Northwest undergrowth, trying to recover animal-scattered remains. But it provided the undeniable physical evidence that a serial predator was operating in the region.
We have to remember, this was an era long before DNA profiling existed. You couldn't just swab a bone and get a name. The primary tool for human identification in advanced decomposition cases was forensic dentistry. The King County Medical Examiner's Office undertook a massive, painstaking effort.
Looking at dental records.
Yeah, they had to collect the dental records and x-rays of every missing young woman in the Pacific Northwest and physically compare the bite patterns and fillings to the skulls found on the mountain. It was an agonizing process, but it finally matched the victims to the boneyard. It gave the families a small measure of definitive closure, even if the full horrific details of the murders and the necrophilia wouldn't be known until his final desperate confessions on death row in 1989.
The legacy of this massive investigative failure, the fact that he was able to hunt so freely for so long, is actually what built the foundation of modern forensic law enforcement.
It literally forced the system to evolve. The profound inability to catch him during this 1974 spree became a textbook case study in why local, siloed policing fails in a mobile society.
It changed everything.
It directly accelerated the creation of the National Crime Information Center databases, allowing jurisdictions to share missing persons data instantly. And it heavily influenced the development of the FBI's behavioral science unit. Law enforcement realized they needed a system that could recognize behavioral patterns across state lines, and they desperately needed to understand the complex psychology of high-functioning predators who didn't look like movie monsters.
We've spent the last hour meticulously deconstructing a 5-month journey into darkness, from January to May 1974. We started with the savage, chaotic survival of Karen Sparks in her own basement bed, and we traced the terrifying, methodical escalation to the sophisticated 250-mile post-mortem transport of Roberta Parks. This spree wasn't just a random series of crimes, it was a terrifying masterclass in psychological manipulation, systemic exploitation, and raw, unadulterated brutality.
And it is vital to remember that this deep dive isn't just a recount of dark historical events. This specific period of time permanently shattered the American illusion of campus safety.
Absolutely.
Universities across the country were forced to wake up. They had to cut back the dense landscaping, implement better lighting, create campus escort services, and install emergency call boxes. It forced a deeply uncomfortable reckoning for all of society. We had to recognize that evil doesn't always hide in the shadows of an alleyway. Sometimes it wears a well-tailored suit, it carries a heavy law book, it smiles warmly, and it asks for your help with a broken arm.
We've spent this entire deep dive dissecting how Theodore Robert Bundy constructed his mask of sanity. We looked at the psychology degree, the government job, the harmless beetle. But looking back at the fractured, uncommunicative police departments, the absolute assumption that an educated law student couldn't possibly be a killer, and the sheer vulnerability of trusting a handsome stranger with his arm in a sling.
Yeah.
It begs a really difficult question that I want you to think about. Did his mask of sanity succeed simply because he was a master illusionist? Or did it succeed because our society was simply too eager, too desperate to look the other way when the monster looked exactly like us?